Well, good morning. Who can possibly believe that we're already the 5th day of January in 2021? Um, Time flies on wings of lightning. We've got a lot of turmoil and heat's turning up. And today I want to talk about accountability of elected people through recall. And what's brought this back around to the forefront is our jet-setting UCP MLAs and their idea of what they can and can't do versus what Albertans can and can't do. And don't know, David, if you want to put up that first title, Accountability of Elected People Through Recall, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But, you know, I have a good friend who always says that having someone elected and not having a recall is like buying a car without brakes. And because we're in a car and driving, we'd be very cautious if we didn't have brakes, and we wouldn't see people flying around, at 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers an hour, 120 kilometers an hour, unless it was a real wide open stretch. But the fact of the matter is, for me, we have two constitutional flaws that is destroying democracy. I talked previously about balanced budgets and about it being in the Constitution, so politicians can't buy votes and spend money uncontrollably. But the other one is the power, and to use that power and the abuse of that power. And for me, if we're going to have a democracy where the government is actually serving and working for the people, and our premier talks so much about, oh, this is servitude, I'm here to serve the people of Alberta, when I would say, well, no, sir, you are abusing your power and you're stripping away our freedoms, and there's nothing we can do. There's no way of doing anything other than protesting. And I tweeted some things about that last Saturday when I was in Calgary at the Freedom Walk and asking for our freedoms to come back, and the hypocrisy, of shutting down small businesses and hair salons and fitness facilities, but yet people can go into Costco and Walmart and the big box stores, and it's just unbelievable, the concentration there, but yet people were being fined at this freedom rally, that this peaceful walk outdoors, people were spread out, and that's not acceptable to the powers that be. And what do we the people do? And I want to say that for my observation and what I see in human nature is that basically we make very little effort and don't spend a lot of time thinking about things that we perceive as impossible or extremely difficult to achieve, and the cost benefit analysis isn't there. And that's the situation that we're in with elected officials. And Canadians as a whole, Albertans as a whole, we exercise that right to choose once every 4 years. I mean, we have early elections because people in power love to take advantage of the opportunities, and so we often have early elections. But bottom line is that we have the opportunity to elect, and then once those people are elected, it always amazes me is their declaration that they have a mandate for every wacky thought that's ever been in their head, even if they hadn't expressed it before an election. And there's basically nothing that we can do. We can complain, we can be bitter, we can send letters, we can protest, but we can't fire them. And I think that that's a critical flaw in our Constitution, in our democratic process here. And to me, David, if you want to just put up on there, but the power needs to reside with the people 24/7. And if it's not there, wherever the power is concentrated, that's where the abuse can and will be. And I kind of look at recall like a speed trap for traveling down the road, that we're always a little bit apprehensive that, it's just around the corner. Is there going to be a speed trap, or is there, that they've got them flying in the air? There's someone around there with the laser gun, and it's actually makes drivers be a little bit cautious, and recall has the same effect. If people absolutely know that there's recall, they're much more cautious and not near as bold as what they might want to be without it. And I don't know, David, if you can put up that nice little picture that you have of the UCP declaring that we're going to be able to fire their people. Can you put up that one? And then you need to get rid of the title so we can read all that. But Alberta United Conservatives will give voters the power to fire their MLAs if they break promises. Well, I just want to be able to fire them if we're upset and they're doing something wrong. So we don't have the right because they didn't break their promises that they went jet setting at Christmas time. Well, we think that they have offended us and that we need to do something a little bit different. But it's something that I've talked a lot about. In 2008, I brought forward legislation when I was in the House. And again, people say you shouldn't use the word pleading or begging. But yet, what else do you say when someone else is in power? When you ask, for permission to be able to fire you. But anyways, it got set aside, and again, the Wild Rose brought it forward 2 more times, and the PCs always put it aside. I found it almost comical with Rachel putting out her tweets and commenting that the UCP have removed their recall. It's funny how she wants it now, but she had 4 years and she imposed a lot of things on us that we didn't vote for and that she didn't have a mandate for, and we could do nothing for 4 years. And I have said, and I will continue to say, that Jason, if you really care about the future of Alberta, you will not only pass recall legislation, but you will put it in for our referendum this fall at the municipal elections, because the most powerful thing that we need to do is to take it out of just legislation and to pass it in a referendum. And had Ralph done this, and I spoke about this on balanced budgets, had Ralph passed a referendum on balanced budgets, Stelmach couldn't have come in and changed it in one day in the legislature by passing new legislation, because legislators cannot pass law that binds future legislators. And so you can always, whatever you've legislated, you can unlegislate. And if you remember, Jason said that, oh, this first year was going to be the summer of repeal, and he was going to repeal everything that Rachel had passed that we didn't like, the restrictions on our parks, the education, the carbon tax. And he talked about the summer of repeal, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they didn't repeal a single bill. Maybe they did repeal the carbon tax, but again, it had gone federal. And yes, they made some minor changes and some adjustments, but they didn't repeal. And so that was the first broken promise, Mr. Premier. You said a summer of repeal. You had a long list, and I'd love for you to show me what you actually repealed, because all you did was make a few minor adjustments, and none of them were big enough, in my opinion. So we need to have that power to reside in the people. And the reason why is because without that speed trap, without that threat that you're going to get in trouble, human nature is that we'll abuse power. But maybe that next title there, David, that power is intoxicating and addictive. And this is really the crux of the problem. And it fascinated me when I got elected into the House and saw government with a majority, and how addictive and how much they wanted that power. And the questions that they asked every day was, what do we got to do to stay in power? And having that power is incredibly intoxicating. I was always amazed at watching the way the different premiers would wield that power and use it for their personal agenda, and say, well, we have a mandate. And so we have that old saying, power is corrupt, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I've witnessed and experienced that in politics time and time again, and in business, that when you have someone who's in a position of power, they will usually abuse it if they're not getting their way. And so for all of these reasons, that power needs to reside with the people 24/7. And the only way that can be there is through recall. And if we don't have it, the abuse goes forward. And the other thing, I guess, to go to the next step, David, on power, recall actually reduces the divisiveness. And one of the problems that we have with our Constitution is it is flawed, and it's a divide and conquer Constitution. And if if we've lost and we're not happy with what we've got, for example, maybe someone's really upset with photo radar and they want to recall their city councilor because they're allowing it to carry on, and you go out and you start trying to collect signatures and you realize that, wow, most people don't care about photo radar because they actually follow the laws, then it's not a problem for them. And it's the lawbreakers that are more upset than the people who want to speed, and they're tired of paying the speed fines. And when you can go out and try and collect the signatures and you talk to your neighbors or you go to a region, you realize that, wow, maybe I'm out of line here, and it reduces that anger and that divisiveness and the animosity between the two sides. And so I think that's one of the great benefits of having a recall, is that even if you fail to be able to recall somebody, you because you attempted and were able to try something and failed, you're much more accepting of that, as opposed to not being able to do anything and angry and helpless. And that's where we have the most divisiveness, and again it continues to build and is a real problem. But with our divide and conquer constitution, I've talked about that again with money, and the fact that astute politicians, they come up with strategies, and again federally it's very easy to say, well, wow, the place with the most money is Alberta. We can strip that away from them by passing different legislation, and we'll tax them higher. We'll set up, the Alberta, the Canadian pension plan such that they'll have to pay more, and they can divide and conquer and take it from us, and there's really nothing that we can do. And basically, our divide and conquer constitution allows for legal plunder and the majority to take away what they want from the minority. And so we need to be able to protect ourselves and stop what we think is foolish or unlawful or unethical laws that are happening. And that's really the situation that we're in today with this lockdown, and why I want to switch and talk a little bit about that and what we should be able to do. But if you want to put up that jet setting picture, David, let's put that up and see here where our wonderful MLAs and staff have flown to, and we've got them over in Hawaii, we've got them down in Phoenix, we got them down in Mexico, we got them in Arizona, and the most problematic one for me is an individual former chief of staff who has gone to England in the bed of this new variant virus that is causing a great fear, but they are saying now, well, yes, it's more contagious, but it's not as deadly. And so, wow, isn't that wonderful? But Canada actually put in a ban and said, nobody can fly here from Britain because of it. So what does he do? He circumvents that and flies to the US, and then comes back to Alberta. And our wonderful premier on January 1st said, well, it's my fault. I didn't really tell those people that they couldn't go. Well, let's put up that picture, David, of what the mandate was, and for us to limit all non-necessary, and I'm gonna have to put on my glasses to read this again, but here's the international travel departures. An official global travel advisory remains in effect. Avoid non-essential travel outside Canada until further notice. The Canada-US border remains closed to non-essential travel. Well, some essential service workers are exempt from travel restrictions if they have no symptoms. Well, that's pretty clear in my mind. And again, that we weren't even to get together for Christmas. I had plans to be with my children and my grandchildren in Revelstoke and to be skiing, and said, well, I guess that we better not do it. And what bothered me the most, though, was the fact that we were shut down for 14 days and in isolation. And so we were actually all safe. And I asked and sent out that letter, saying, Premier, please allow us to get together for Christmas and New Year's. If it's about flattening the curve and you've locked us down for 10 days, 14 days, we know that we don't have it. We should be able to get together with family and then go back home, and there's no problem. But he wouldn't allow that. But yet he gave these feeble excuses about his people, saying that, well, I didn't really say they couldn't go, and they come up with these feeble excuses. And I'm sorry, Mr. Premier, but it isn't your job to decide whether or not Albertans want your MLAs to remain in office. But you promised recall. You haven't given it to us. And as I put out in my letter yesterday, it says you don't have to have legislation to be accountable through recall. Every time that I ran and was elected, I always told my people if 50% plus one of the total number of votes in the last election sign a petition wanting to fire me, I would respect that and I would resign. I might run again in that next election, but I would respect the majority will of the people. And you can and should do this, Premier. You should allow recall to be out there, and needs to be a verifiable, probably online petition, because you haven't raised the lockdown and allow people to go out. And again, people are very fearful because of the way you have continued to put out the information about COVID. You're not truthful. You don't give all the information. You only give the information to put fear not only into people. I talked to one grandfather that was going over to visit his grandchildren on Christmas Day. They were safe. They'd been in isolation, and the 9-year-old is having trouble sleeping. He's got I guess, what would I say? He's fearful, and he says, like, Grandpa, you can't come. What if the police come and take you away? What if they put you in jail? And he's almost, having bad dreams and nightmares over this fact that people are getting together. And the fear that we're putting in our children is despicable, in my opinion. And we need to be able to fire these current MLAs that are above the law, and they get to travel when the rest of us are being punished. I don't know, David. We forgot to talk about this, but do you have the picture of the police at the rally that was? And again, if it hasn't been redacted and the face is taken off, I don't want it shown of the people. But I went to the Freedom Walk rally last Saturday and spoke there in favor of our freedoms and for people to make their own individual decisions. But people were getting $1,200 fines for just being in the public and out walking and demonstrating. And these MLAs are okay to do that. But bottom line is that we need recall. And recall to me is very simple, that if there's 20,000 people who voted in the last election, then it would take 10,001 signatures to fire an elected individual. And whether that's Mayor Nenshi, whether it's one of the city councilors in Calgary that are having these policemen going around and giving tickets to people. And we've all seen the picture of the young men playing hockey on an open rink, and that despicable action there, and this authoritarian police force that is punishing people for being out and about because we're breaking the edict of our health officials and our premier. But yet somehow they say it's really not a problem to get on an airplane and to fly internationally and to come back. Well, in case you didn't know, Mr. Premier, it's actually air travel that has spread the virus around the world better than anything else, and why it accelerates so fast. And so every angle of it is pathetic. But what's really pathetic is there's nothing that the people can do. And you're just hoping that we won't remember it in 2.5 or 2.25 years from now. We need recall. We need you to put it on the fall referendum, and it just needs to be done. And if the people are upset, you should say that we will respect recall, and people will go out and start collecting the signatures or collect them online for Elections Alberta to decide if they're verified, and these individuals should be fired from their job. And that includes you, Premier. I don't think that your riding would want to fire you, but yet I think it would slow you down and you'd have second thoughts on some of the draconian legislation and dictates that, or edicts that you have put out, that are doing far more harm to individuals than the virus is. And so to go back and talk a little bit about the importance and how recall can be entrenched so that the next individual, next premier can't remove it, it needs to be by a referendum. And so we can pass legislation and saying that, here's recall and here's the time period and how you can do it and how much money you can spend. And then, like I say, if you actually have a referendum by the people, then the next legislatures can't come in and remove that law. They need to say, well, it was passed by a referendum. So if we want to remove recall, we need to have another referendum and tell the people, look, we have some really progressive and bold things we want to do, but we think that if you guys have recall, we won't be allowed to make these tough decisions. So please remove recall and then let us do these and impose these new laws on you. And ultimately, though, where it needs to be is in an Alberta constitution, where only way you can change it is by changing the constitution, which we all know is very difficult. But David, do we have any questions coming up on recall? And I think I've covered most of the points that I wanted to cover. Are there any questions? What do you think of UCP scrubbing details of recall legislation promised from their party website? This is just typical of individuals that aren't principle driven, and again, they're intoxicated and addictive to the power. And more insulting is that they think that they know better how to run our lives than we know how to run our own. And again, generally this is something that we see more from the left, where and then from dictatorships and totalitarian regimes, where they always talk about the benefit of society, and that the individual needs to be sacrificed for the benefit of society. And it's just it's wrong. Once the individual has lost their rights and their freedoms, it can be taken away from everyone, and it eventually is. It's just moves along kind of like the temperature. It slowly goes up, and you don't realize that you're in trouble. If you know the old story of the frog, if you put him in a pot of water and start heating it up, you'll boil him to death. If you throw him in a hot pot, he'll jump out and save himself. And because these things are being eroded slowly and carefully, and fear in there that we need to do this, it's a problem. And again, Jason obviously has never been sincere about that. He's passed dozens and dozens of pieces of legislation. When I was in there and when Danielle Smith went in there, I've always been a proponent and believer the very first piece of legislation that any government that cares about the future of the province should be on recall. We need to strip that power away from the elected and given back to the people. And so, no, it just goes to show their intent, their arrogance, their self-declared moral superiority over each and every one of us, and the fact that we don't know how to run and control our lives. But David, is there another question? Does a recall lead to a by-election, and if so, could the process get abused in a divided riding? Well, that's always the argument that many people have and say, well, when would it ever end? I think that you'd find, and again, when I've gone door knocking and talking to people, once someone's elected, they give them a lot of latitude. But what these 5, 6 MLAs have done has gone past that tolerance level where people are upset. And that's why I always say 50% plus one of the total number of votes. Many times with our multiple party elections, people can get elected with 38 or 39 or 42 or 48%. And there's 52% that haven't elected them. But yet, if you go and try and recall them, most people aren't upset enough to sign it. And it's not easy, like Tracy Allard, I think Stefan and those other ones, you're looking at going out and collecting 10,000 signatures in order to recall these individuals, and that's not an easy feat or easy task. But if the people are as upset as what we think we are, and again, this is why I talk about it, it actually reduces the anger, and people are more receptive to it. If we were able to go out and start collecting signatures to recall these MLAs, we would get a very quick temperature of what people's feelings really are, and realize that, oh, I guess most people aren't as upset as me, and it's not such a big deal. But anyways, it's important that you have it. It reduces the anger and the animosity, and that to me is what we need. And the risk that there's always going to be recall, I don't think it's there. And again, if it is, and we find that we're having frivolous recall at 50% plus one, you could raise it and say, because generally if you have 50% of the people that come out and vote, that's really only 25% of the people that are actually signing it to get recall. If 60% of the people come out and vote, then it's a 30% threshold. And if we find that we're having recall and people are getting back in because they run again, then we can simply say, well, let's raise the recall level to 50% of the total registered voters. And all of a sudden, instead of 10,000, you need 20,000. And that works very well for controlling it. But if we need to adjust the numbers on how many people have to sign, we can do that. But let's have the power reside with the people, and be safe that way. Well, I think that that's all that we need to cover today. If you got more questions on this, please send them in. But I think the most important thing, and it's interesting because the anger level went up so much, that the premier actually stripped these people of their what would I say, their portfolios, their backbenchers basically, and they've lost a few dollars. But I don't think it's enough. I think that the people should be the judges on whether or not they keep their jobs. As many tweets, maybe you want to put up a few of those tweets that people have put out questioning their wage that they're still getting, David. That one about the 120,000, is only going to lose her cabinet position, but she is still going to make $120,000 a year. It's so despicable, and that to me is a type of tweet that's why the people get to decide. And again, this individual who's so upset, if he could go out and have the ability to start collecting signatures and realize that, wow, not everybody's as upset as me, it's a calming feature, and we need that more in our democracy. We're becoming more divisive, and that's not healthy. It's not good. We need to communicate and to realize where people's actual thoughts are. But anyways, for the first video of 2021, thank you for tuning in. But let's put the pressure on the premier and say, we want to be able to recall these individuals. You don't need to pass legislation. You just need to say that we'll honor recall, and let people go out and vent their frustration. And we'll find out whether people want them to carry on in their jobs and just being slapped on the hand is good enough, or whether people want to fire them. But it's not your decision, Premier. It should be the people's decision, and that can only be done through recall. But take care, God bless, and let's carry on, and let's have 2021 to be a great year where we bring accountability back to the people, or power back to the people, and accountability of our elected individuals. But thank you, and we'll talk again soon.